Hello, dear story lovers. At the amount of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a huge series of special stories for you. Subscribe now. The Zylark vessel, VA Lauren Drift, emerged from hyperspace like a ghost ship, its hull bruised from encounters with asteroid debris. The crew aboard, tall and angular beings with shimmering, iridescent skin, moved with precision as they prepared for the final leg of their grim mission. Deep within the ship's cargo bay, the muffled growls and scratching of claws echoed through the metallic chamber, a haunting reminder of their deadly cargo. Inside a reinforced crate, the Krylorian wolf snarled, her piercing emerald eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Her cubs, 3 small bundles of fur marked with streaks of bioluminescent patterns, whimpered and nuzzled close to their mother. The crate's interior was designed to suppress the creature's formidable abilities. It was lined with a polymer that neutralized their energy-sensitive instincts and emitted a constant hum to keep them disoriented. Still, Lyra, the mother wolf, had not stopped fighting. Commander Fyrek, one of the crew, spoke, their voice a melody of clicks and hums translated by an AI module. The containment unit is stable, but the risk of escape grows the longer we keep them aboard. We must execute the directive. Commander Fyrek stood at the control panel, his translucent fingers gliding over glowing glyphs. He glanced at the crate through the observation window. The wolf inside locked eyes with him, her growl low but resonant enough to send a shiver through his spine. These creatures were a mistake, bred in Zylark labs for combat enhancement, but deemed uncontrollable and far too dangerous. The High Council had issued an unyielding order: dispose of them. The Council has spoken, Fyrek replied, his tone devoid of emotion. No civilization must encounter these creatures. Arachon 4 is uninhabited, desolate. They will not survive long. The crew executed the drop with clinical precision. The crate, rigged with inertial dampeners to ensure it landed intact, was jettisoned into the planet's atmosphere. A fiery streak lit up the twilight sky as the crate descended, its crash muffled by the planet's dense, icy terrain. Within moments, the VA Lauren Drift activated its jump drive, disappearing into the void, leaving the crate and its occupants behind. On the surface, the crate hissed as it settled into the frozen ground. Arachon 4 was a hostile world, its landscape a mosaic of jagged ice plains and towering black spires of rock. Wind howled relentlessly, carrying particles sharp enough to etch grooves into exposed surfaces. Inside the crate, Lyra stirred, her instincts screaming at her to act, to protect her cubs. They were cold, their fragile bodies trembling against her warmth. She growled and bared her teeth at the metal walls that enclosed them. Her claws scraped futilely at the polymer lining, sparks flying with each attempt. She could sense the life outside, the faint pulse of bacteria in the frozen ground, the rustling of primitive scavengers, but the crate was impenetrable. Hours passed, and desperation took hold. Lyra's growls turned into pained howls, a haunting symphony of survival and despair. Her cubs, too weak to respond, emitted faint cries that barely rose above the wind's roar. The planet was silent, but not without witnesses. A scavenging drone, a relic from an ancient alien probe, hovered nearby. Its rudimentary sensors recorded the wolf's cries, logging the sound as data of unknown significance. The drone drifted off into the icy distance, oblivious to the life-and-death struggle unfolding. The Krylorian wolf and her cubs were alone now, surrounded by the cold, unyielding expanse of Arachon 4. Survival seemed impossible, and yet, Lyra's luminous eyes burned with determination. If the Zylarks had underestimated anything, it was the unyielding will of a mother who refused to let her family perish. Above the desolate landscape, the stars shimmered, a cosmic reminder that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, hope could take root. Far away, aboard a human research vessel, sensors were beginning to detect the faint heat signature of the newly fallen crate, setting the stage for a meeting of worlds that neither side could have foreseen. The Stellar Horizon, a mid-sized human research vessel bristling with sensor arrays and shimmering solar sails, cruised through the outer rim of the Zitharon Nebula. On board, Captain Helena Marsh stood at the bridge, staring at the holographic projection of Ericon 4. The planet's icy surface reflected a dull blue light in the display, a stark contrast to the nebulous swirling colors of gold and violet. Helena's mission was clear: catalog potential life-sustaining properties of uninhabited planets. Ericon 4, however, was a known dead zone, a place of frozen wastelands and toxic atmosphere, its magnetic fields hostile to long-term technology deployment. Despite this, an anomaly had appeared on the ship's long-range sensors. Confirmed thermal signature detected, reported Dr. Owen Reese, the vessel's xenobiologist. He adjusted his glasses as he scrutinized the readings on his console. A small but concentrated heat source near the planet's southern ice plains. It doesn't match any known geological activity. Could it be a malfunction? Helena asked, her curiosity piqued. Reese shook his head. Negative. It's too localized, and the energy pattern is artificial. I'd wager it's something dropped recently, possibly the crash site or even an abandoned satellite. Helena nodded. Plot a course for orbital recon. Let's take a closer look. The stellar horizon descended into a stable orbit over Ericon 4. From their vantage point, the planet looked like a frigid marble, its surface etched with jagged lines of ice and shadow. Automated probes were deployed, their cameras feeding back high-resolution images of the surface. In one feed, something metallic glinted in the weak sunlight. Zoom in, Helena ordered. The display enhanced the image, revealing a large crate embedded in the ice. Its exterior was scarred from atmospheric entry, but its structure remained intact. Unmarked cargo, Reese murmured. No identification signals or serial numbers. This wasn't meant to be found. Any signs of life? Helena asked. Reese studied the bioscans. Faint readings inside. Heat signatures consistent with organic matter. Whatever's in there, it's alive. Helena's gaze narrowed. Ericon 4 is a death trap. If there's something alive in that crate, it won't last long. Prep the shuttle. We're going down. The shuttle cut through Ericon IV's turbulent atmosphere, its reinforced hull glowing faintly from re-entry. Helena piloted the craft herself, deftly navigating the relentless winds that buffeted the shuttle. Beside her, Dr. Reese and Ensign Mia Vega, the ship's engineer, monitored the environment. The landing site was harsh. Gale-force winds whipped up shards of ice, and the ground beneath their boots cracked ominously. Helena led the way, her steps steady despite the treacherous terrain. They approached the crate, its side streaked with scorch marks and patches of frost. A series of claw marks etched into the metal hinted at a desperate struggle within. Sealed tight, Vega said, running her gloved hand over the crate's surface. Whoever built this didn't want whatever's inside getting out. Let's see what they were so afraid of, Helena said, signaling Reese to scan the interior. The xenobiologist knelt beside the crate, his handheld bioscanner emitting a soft hum. The display showed a large life form surrounded by 3 smaller ones. Their vital signs were faint but present. 4 occupants, Reese reported. The large one's heart rate is weak but steady. The smaller ones are barely holding on. Helena's brow furrowed. What kind of creatures are we dealing with? Reese hesitated. Based on the mass and physiological structure. Krylorian wolves. The words hung in the frigid air like a death knell. Krylorian wolves were infamous predators, designed by alien geneticists for warfare. Their reputation as bloodthirsty, unrelenting hunters preceded them. Yet the faint cries emanating from within the crate were far from menacing. They sounded vulnerable. We should leave, Vega said, her voice tight with fear. Those things are killers. If we open that crate, we might not make it back to the shuttle. Helena knelt beside the crate, her breath visible in the cold. She placed a hand on its surface, feeling the faint vibrations of movement inside. Her mind raced. The ethical dilemma was clear: leaving them meant certain death. But saving them could endanger her crew and potentially the galaxy. They're not just creatures, Helena said finally, her voice resolute. They're a mother and her cubs. And they're suffering. Vega looked skeptical. Captain, these things were abandoned here for a reason. That doesn't mean they deserve to die, Helena countered. We're scientists, explorers. It's our duty to preserve life, not condemn it. Helena stood, her decision made. Vega, prep the containment bay. Reese, help me override the locking mechanism. The crate hissed as its seals released, filling the air with a burst of humid vapor. Inside, the mother wolf, Lyra, lifted her head weakly. Her glowing green eyes locked onto Helena's, a mix of defiance and desperation. The cubs huddled against her, their tiny bodies barely moving. Easy, Helena whispered, lowering her weapon. She extended a hand slowly, her posture non-threatening. We're here to help. Lyra growled low, her lips curling back to reveal razor-sharp teeth. But as Helena held her ground, the wolf seemed to sense the human's intent. Her growl softened into a whimper. We've got you, Helena said softly. Together, the team carefully transferred the wolves into containment pods designed for secure transport. The cubs, too weak to resist, let out faint cries as they were moved. Lyra, though hesitant, allowed herself to be loaded into the shuttle, never taking her eyes off Helena. As the shuttle ascended, the icy landscape of Ericon grew smaller beneath them. Helena sat beside the containment pods, watching Lyra and her cubs closely. In the mother wolf's eyes, Helena saw something unexpected, not the savage hunger of a predator, but a spark of trust. For better or worse, the fates of these creatures and their human rescuers were now intertwined. The stellar horizon buzzed with controlled chaos as the shuttle docked in its bay. Lights flashed, and the hum of containment protocols filled the air as the crew prepared to handle their unexpected passengers. Captain Helena Marsh was the first to disembark, her face set with determination as she glanced at the containment pods holding the Krylorian wolves. Behind her, Dr. Owen Reese and Ensign Mia Vega followed, both looking apprehensive. Containment Bay 3 is prepped, called out Sarah Lynn, the ship's head of biosecurity. We've reinforced the barriers and implemented a multi-tiered failsafe system. If these things breach containment, we'll vent the entire bay. They won't breach, Helena said firmly, though she understood the precaution. Krylorian wolves were infamous for their strength, cunning, and ability to adapt. The crew's unease was palpable, but Helena was resolute. We'll stabilize them and figure out what's next. Inside Containment Bay 3, Lyra and her cubs were transferred into reinforced observation chambers. The mother wolf stirred weakly, her bioluminescent patterns flickering faintly as she watched the humans with cautious eyes. The cubs, small and fragile, were barely moving, their tiny forms curled up against each other. Dr. Reese immediately began scanning them with a series of handheld diagnostic tools. Malnourished, dehydrated, and hypothermic, he murmured, shaking his head. The mother's metabolism is strong, but she's burning through her reserves to keep the cubs alive. If we don't intervene now, they won't make it. Helena turned to Vega. We need a nutrient solution. Something compatible with their biology. I'll synthesize one, Vega replied, already moving to the lab. But it's going to take time to isolate the right compounds. We can't afford a mistake with creatures this complex. Work fast, Helena urged, her gaze drifting to Lyra. The mother wolf was watching her intently, her glowing eyes flickering with a mix of distrust and exhaustion. Helena approached the observation chamber slowly, keeping her movements deliberate. She knelt to meet Lyra's gaze, her hands resting on her knees. We're not your enemies, she said softly. We're trying to help. Lyra growled faintly but made no move to attack. She shifted her massive body to shield her cubs, a clear gesture of protection. Helena took it as a small sign of trust. Hours turned into a blur of activity as the crew worked to stabilize the wolves. Vega's synthesized nutrient solution was administered via an 4-drip to Lyra and her cubs. The mother wolf responded first, her breathing stabilizing as her strength began to return. The cubs were slower to recover, their frail bodies taking longer to absorb the nutrients. Helena and Reese monitored their progress closely, watching for any signs of rejection or adverse reactions. Despite the inherent danger, Helena found herself mesmerized by Lyra. The wolf's intelligence was unmistakable. She observed the humans with a calculating gaze, her eyes darting between the crew as though assessing their intentions. She seemed to understand that they were helping, tolerating their presence despite her natural instincts. As the days passed, the wolf's condition improved. The cubs began to stir more frequently, their tiny forms wriggling against the warmth of their mother's body. Lyra herself grew more alert, her bioluminescent patterns regaining their vibrancy. The crew, while still wary, began to shift from fear to fascination. One evening, as Helena worked late in the observation bay, Lyra approached the transparent wall of her chamber. The motion caught Helena's attention, and she looked up to find the wolf staring at her. For a moment, Helena froze, unsure of what the mother wolf wanted. Then, to her surprise, Lyra lowered her massive head and pressed her muzzle gently against the glass. It was a gesture not of aggression, but of curiosity and perhaps gratitude. Helena stepped closer, her heart pounding. She placed her hand on the glass, mirroring the wolf's position. "You're not what they say you are you?" she whispered. Lyra blinked, her glowing eyes reflecting Helena's image. In that moment, the captain felt an unspoken connection, a bridge of understanding between two vastly different beings. The crew's observations of Lyra and her cubs revealed behaviors that defied the terrifying reputation of Krylorian wolves. Lyra demonstrated remarkable intelligence, even cooperation. She followed the crew's routines, her eyes tracking their movements as though trying to learn from them. Her cubs began to mimic her, their small bodies clumsily exploring their containment area. Dr. Reese was the first to document the wolves' unexpected traits. "They're not just predators," he explained during a meeting in the ship's conference room. Lyra's behavior suggests a level of sentience far beyond what the Xylarks recorded. Her instincts are tempered by an emotional intelligence we've never seen in this species. Helena leaned forward, her fingers steepled. "You're saying they're more than just weapons?" Reese nodded. "Exactly. The Xylarks may have bred them for combat, but they underestimated their capacity for adaptation and connection. Lyra's protective instincts extend beyond her cubs. She started to see us as allies." Not everyone on the crew was convinced. "Allies?" Vega interjected. "They're still dangerous. One wrong move and those teeth will rip us apart." "Dangerous, yes," Helena said, her voice steady. "But not mindless. We've seen that now. And if we can understand them, we might be able to change how they're perceived, how they're treated." The room fell silent, the weight of Helena's words sinking in. The rescue mission had become something far greater, a chance to rewrite the narrative of one of the galaxy's most feared species. Later that night, as Helena sat alone in the observation bay, one of the cubs toddled forward on unsteady legs. Its tiny nose pressed against the transparent wall, its bioluminescent stripes glowing softly. Helena smiled, the sight filling her with hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that saving Lyra and her cubs hadn't just been the right decision, it had been destiny. The transformation of the stellar horizon from a research vessel into a haven for its alien passengers unfolded over the following weeks. Lyra and her cubs, now thriving under the crew's care, had become the subject of fascination, debate, and hope. What started as a rescue mission had grown into a challenge to the galaxy's understanding of a species long feared and misunderstood. The cubs, named Nova, Pixis, and Astra, displayed rapid development, their movements more coordinated, their glowing bioluminescent patterns increasingly vibrant. They interacted playfully with each other, and occasionally, with the humans observing from the other side of the containment barrier. Lyra, ever watchful, allowed the interactions to continue but always kept her imposing presence between her cubs and the humans. Captain Helena Marsh spent most of her time in the observation bay, documenting every nuance of Lyra's behavior. The mother wolf had begun to exhibit an uncanny ability to communicate low growls and soft whines that shifted depending on the situation. Helena and Dr. Owen Reese developed a rudimentary framework for interpreting Lyra's vocalizations, further solidifying their belief in her advanced intelligence. "This isn't just survival instinct," Helena said during a crew meeting. "Lyra understands us. She's learning. And she's teaching her cubs to trust us." Reese added, "We're seeing the first steps toward a relationship that could redefine how we view species like the Krylorian wolves. They're not just weapons, they're a culture in their own right." Word of the wolves' rescue had spread beyond the stellar horizon. Using encrypted transmissions, Helena reached out to trusted xenobiologists and interspecies rights advocates across the galaxy. The responses were a mix of skepticism and intrigue, but a few brave souls ventured out to witness the phenomenon firsthand. Dr. Kieran Vell, a renowned xenologist, arrived aboard a shuttle weeks later. Her reaction upon seeing Lyra was one of astonishment. "The Xylarks made a mistake," she said after hours of observation. "They bred these creatures for war, but they created something far more profound. They have the capacity for emotional bonds, even empathy." The crew's findings soon reached the Galactic Concordium, the governing body overseeing interspecies relations. A delegation of scientists and diplomats requested a live feed from the stellar horizon, which Helena reluctantly agreed to provide. For the first time, the galaxy witnessed the wolves not as predators, but as a family, a mother nurturing her young, a bond stronger than fear or violence. The final hurdle was deciding what to do with the wolves. Keeping them aboard the stellar horizon was unsustainable, the growing cubs required more space, and Lyra's instincts to roam were becoming evident. Helena knew that releasing them into the wild was impossible. The Xylarks would see them as a threat and hunt them down, and most other species would react with panic. It was Dr. Reese who proposed a solution. "The terraforming project on Talora 4 is nearing completion," he said. "It's uninhabited and secured by the Concordium. The atmosphere is stable, and the ecosystem is robust enough to support apex predators like Lyra." The crew debated the idea at length. Some worried about the risks of relocating such dangerous creatures, while others saw it as a chance to give the wolves a future. In the end, Helena made the final call. "Lyra and her cubs deserve a chance," she said. "Talora 4 could be that chance. We'll establish a sanctuary and monitor them. But we owe it to them and to ourselves to see this through." The journey to Talora 4 was tense but filled with anticipation. Lyra seemed to sense that something was changing. She was calmer, more cooperative, as if she trusted the humans to guide her family to safety. When the stellar horizon entered orbit around Talora 4, the crew was greeted by a breathtaking sight. The planet was a patchwork of lush green forests, rolling plains, and shimmering blue lakes. Its two moons cast a silvery glow over the surface, a stark contrast to the icy wasteland where the wolves had been abandoned. Helena led the effort to establish the sanctuary. Using advanced technology, the crew built a secure habitat that would allow Lyra and her cubs to adapt to their new home while being monitored remotely. They released the wolves into the heart of a sprawling forest, where prey was plentiful and the environment was tailored to their needs. The release was both heartwarming and bittersweet. Lyra stepped out of the containment pod first, her glowing green eyes scanning the forest. She sniffed the air, her posture cautious but curious. One by one, the cubs followed her, their bioluminescent patterns lighting up the darkening forest. Helena watched from a distance, her chest tight with emotion. Lyra paused, turning to look back at the humans who had saved her. For a moment, their eyes met, and Helena felt a deep connection, a silent thank you, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of what they had shared. Then Lyra turned and led her cubs into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. The stellar horizon remained in orbit for weeks, monitoring the wolves' adaptation to their new home. The data collected was groundbreaking. Lyra established the territory, taught her cubs to hunt, and even interacted with other species in the ecosystem without hostility. Her intelligence and emotional depth continued to astound the scientists observing her. News of the sanctuary spread, sparking debates across the galaxy. The Xylarks, faced with irrefutable evidence of their creation's potential, issued a public statement admitting they had underestimated the Krylorian wolves. The Galactic Concordium began drafting new laws to protect sentient species, inspired by Lyra's story. As the stellar horizon prepared to leave Talora 4, Helena stood on the observation deck, watching the planet recede into the distance. She knew she might never see Lyra or her cubs again, but she took solace in the knowledge that they were safe and that she had been part of something far greater than a simple rescue mission. In the silence of space, Helena whispered to herself, "Goodbye, Lyra. May you and your family find the peace you deserve." And with that, the stellar horizon turned toward its next mission, leaving behind a legacy of hope, understanding, and second chances.